They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that greed severs any family tie. Imagine working 80 hours a week for years to buy a coastal sanctuary, only to discover your own brother plotting to steal it using forged signatures and a scam startup. You think you know your family until $500,000 is on the line, and suddenly you are the villain in their delusional fairy tale. Buckle up. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Josephine Rivera. I am 32 years old, and for the past 8 years, my life has been defined by late nights, endless spreadsheets, and relentless dedication. I work as a project manager at Etheria Dynamics, a tech conglomerate that demands nothing short of perfection from its employees. It is a demanding job, the kind that drains your soul but pays remarkably well if you are willing to sacrifice your personal life. And sacrifice I did. While my peers were out partying, enjoying weekend getaways, or traveling the world, I was saving every single penny. My ultimate goal was not a fancy sports car or a closet full of designer clothes. It was a sanctuary. 2 years ago, I finally achieved that dream when I purchased a stunning, albeit incredibly run-down, beachfront property at Seacrest Bay. I spent 12 agonizing months pouring my blood, my sweat, and my entire remaining savings account into renovating it. I managed every contractor, picked out every tile, and transformed it into a tranquil haven away from the corporate grind. It was my proudest achievement, a physical manifestation of my independence, entirely mine, paid for with 80-hour work weeks and countless missed holidays. I should have known something was deeply wrong when my younger brother, Leo, invited us to an absurdly expensive Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. Leo was 28, but he possessed the financial maturity of a teenager. For as long as I could remember, he had been the undisputed golden child of the family, a charming but lazy drifter who bounced from one failed entrepreneurial venture to another. Whenever he fell, our parents, Marcus and Elena, were right there to catch him, constantly bailing him out of debt and making excuses for his behavior. But tonight was supposed to be different. He and his newly minted fiancée, Chloe, were officially hosting a family dinner to discuss their upcoming wedding plans. The atmosphere in the heavily draped private dining room was thick with an unsettling level of artificial cheer. The crystal water glasses clinked. The ambient lighting cast warm, deceptive shadows. Yet I felt a familiar, suffocating knot forming in my stomach. Something felt completely orchestrated. Throughout the overpriced appetizers and the lavish main course, my parents could not stop fawning over the happy couple. My mother, Elena, continuously praised Chloe for her impeccable taste and her brilliant, though entirely unproven, business acumen. My father, Marcus, patted Leo on the back so hard I thought he might dislocate his shoulder, proudly declaring to the waiter and anyone else within earshot that his son had finally grown up and was ready to conquer the world. I sat there quietly, sipping my remarkably dry red wine, offering polite smiles and appropriate nods whenever someone looked my way. I was genuinely trying to be supportive, hoping that Leo was finally settling down, but the exaggerated, theatrical praise felt rehearsed. It felt exactly like a carefully directed stage play building up to a dramatic reveal. The dessert plates had barely been cleared from the table when the tone of the evening abruptly shifted. Chloe reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek silver tablet. She did not bring out floral arrangements, fabric swatches, or seating charts for the wedding. Instead, she opened a meticulously designed digital slide deck. I stared in utter confusion as she placed the tablet in the dead center of the table. The brightly lit screen displayed a pristine, minimalist logo with the words, Aura Wellness, an exclusive healing retreat. Leo cleared his throat, suddenly adopting the forced, overly enthusiastic cadence of a motivational speaker. He stood up and began pacing behind his chair, pitching a luxury wellness startup that aimed to provide spiritual healing to burnt-out executives. Chloe chimed in every few seconds, aggressively dropping corporate buzzwords like synergy, holistic integration, paradigm shifts, and passive income streams. It was a slick, polished presentation, but it was completely devoid of any actual business model, risk analysis, or financial projections. I watched this bizarre charade unfold in real time, wondering why on earth they were pitching a startup at their wedding planning dinner. Then, Leo stopped his pacing and looked directly at me. His voice took on a sickly sweet, earnest tone that made my skin crawl. He explained that every great visionary project needs a solid foundation, a physical anchor to manifest its destiny. For Aura Wellness to truly succeed, they needed the absolute perfect flagship location. A place with unobstructed ocean views, serene natural energy, and most importantly, immediate availability without the burden of a massive commercial mortgage. He paused dramatically, placing both of his hands firmly on the table and leaning toward me. "Josephine," he said, staring right into my eyes with a disturbing level of entitlement, "we want your house at Seacrest Bay. We need you to sign over the title and transfer ownership to our newly formed limited liability company. It will be the foundation of our empire, and honestly, we cannot think of a more perfect, meaningful wedding gift from my big, successful sister." The silence that blanketed the room after that statement was deafening. For a solid 10 seconds, my brain simply refused to process the sheer audacity of his words. Then, a sharp, involuntary laugh erupted from my chest. I laughed hard, shaking my head, fully expecting Leo to crack a smile, bump my shoulder, and admit it was a terrible, tasteless joke meant to break the tension. I looked over at Chloe, waiting for her to giggle or roll her eyes at his absurdity. But her face was completely stone-like, her eyes locked on me with a chilling, calculating intensity. My laughter died instantly in my throat as I turned my desperate gaze to my parents. I fully expected Marcus to reprimand Leo for being disrespectful, or for Elena to quickly change the subject and apologize for the inappropriate humor. Instead, both of them were staring at me with bright, intensely expectant eyes. My mother even leaned forward in her chair, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her face, nodding encouragingly as if she were waiting for me to pull a fancy pen out of my purse and happily sign my life away right there over the dessert spoons. The crushing, suffocating realization crashed down on me like a physical blow. This was not a poorly timed joke. This was an ambush, and everyone at the table was in on it except me. Absolutely not. The words left my mouth before anyone else could speak. I kept my voice incredibly even, suppressing the tremor shaking my hands. "I am not giving you my house, Leo. That is insane." My brother blinked, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Come on, Joe. Think about the bigger picture. We are offering you a chance to be a foundational part of a revolutionary movement." "I am looking at this from a place of reality," I shot back, the anger bleeding into my tone. "I spent the last 2 years working straight through weekends and holidays to secure that mortgage. I survived on 4 hours of sleep a night to pay for the roof, the plumbing, and the foundation. I am not signing over my hard-earned property to a limited liability company with zero track record, zero revenue, and an entirely unproven business model." That was all it took to light the fuse. My mother, Elena, gasped loudly, pressing a hand to her chest. Within seconds, thick tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her makeup. "How can you sit there and be so utterly cold-blooded?" she cried out. "Your brother is finally trying to build a future, and you are throwing his past mistakes in his face. You have always been so selfish, Josephine, always jealous of his happiness." I stared at her, genuinely dumbfounded. "Jealous? Mom, he is asking me to hand over an asset worth $500,000 for nothing in return. How does refusing to be robbed make me jealous? Do not use that word. My father slammed his hand flat against the table. No one is robbing you. He is your blood. Family helps family. But clearly the corporate world has destroyed your moral compass. You are trying to ruin the future of this family just so you can sit in an empty beach house by yourself. I threw $200 onto the table to cover my portion of the meal, grabbed my coat, and walked out, leaving them to their manufactured outrage. But the psychological warfare was only just beginning. The very next morning, the relentless bombardment started. My father called me at exactly 8 o'clock, and when I did not answer, he left a 5-minute voicemail. Then he called again at noon, and again at 6 in the evening. This pattern continued every single day. He employed a calm, deeply patronizing tone designed to make me feel like a greedy, misbehaving child. "You need to think about your soul, Josephine," he would say through the phone speaker. "You make an incredible salary at Etheria Dynamics. That is more than enough. You do not really need that property at the Bay. Why are you hoarding wealth when your own flesh and blood is struggling to launch a dream? You are letting greed consume your humanity." While my father played the disappointed moral authority, Leo took a much more vicious route. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Leo had taken to his social media platforms to launch a highly orchestrated smear campaign. He never mentioned me by name, but the passive-aggressive targets painted on my back were unmistakable. He posted lengthy, emotionally manipulative paragraphs about how toxic capitalism was destroying familial bonds. He wrote about the agony of young, passionate entrepreneurs being crushed under the heels of soulless corporate executives who cared more about property deeds than human connection. Chloe joined in, commenting on his posts with crying face emojis, talking about how devastating it is when the people you trust the most refuse to see your light. The comment sections were flooded with sympathy. Dozens of people who had no idea about the actual situation were offering Leo their prayers and condemning the anonymous, greedy relative who was blocking his path to greatness. The sheer volume of the manipulation began to chip away at my reality. When 4 people you have known your entire life look you dead in the eye and call you a monster, you start to wonder if they are right. I found myself lying awake at 3 in the morning, analyzing my own character. Was I being too rigid? Was my attachment to the house a sign of unhealthy materialism? Did I owe my brother my financial stability simply because we shared the same parents? The gaslighting was so intense that the boundaries of my own sanity began to blur. By the end of the second week, the panic attacks started. My chest would tighten during standard office meetings, my breathing growing shallow as the weight of my family's collective hatred pressed down on me. Desperate to regain my grip on reality, I booked an emergency session with a licensed therapist. Sitting across from her, I poured out the entire absurd saga. I expected judgment, to be told I was unsupportive. Instead, she offered absolute clarity, systematically dismantling the web of guilt they had spun around me. She reminded me that setting boundaries is a requirement for survival. More importantly, she looked me directly in the eyes and delivered the truth I desperately needed to hear. Protecting my legally acquired property from financial predators does not make me a villain, even if those predators happen to share my last name. Exactly 1 month had passed since the disastrous dinner that shattered my perception of my family. I had effectively cut all contact with my parents and Leo, sending their daily barrages of manipulative text messages directly to an archive folder and letting their phone calls ring endlessly into voicemail. I thought the worst of the storm had passed, assuming their short attention spans would eventually redirect them toward some other fabricated drama. I was completely and utterly wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon, right around 3:30, when my office desk phone vibrated with an incoming call from a number I barely recognized. It was Martha, the retired schoolteacher who lived in the quaint cottage located about a quarter of a mile down the road from my property at Seacrest Bay. "Josephine, honey," her voice crackled through the speaker, laced with a distinct mix of neighborly concern and hushed curiosity. "I really did not want to bother you during your working hours, but I thought you absolutely needed to know there have been some very strange folks poking around your property. Groups of men in tailored suits, driving fancy imported cars. They were walking all over your front lawn yesterday, pointing at the roof, inspecting the wraparound deck, and taking notes on clipboards. Are you quietly putting the place on the real estate market?" A cold, sharp chill radiated directly down my spine. I assured Martha that I was absolutely not selling my home and thanked her profusely for keeping an eye out. The moment I disconnected the call, my mind raced a million miles a minute. I knew exactly who was orchestrating those visits, but knowing the truth and having concrete proof are two entirely different legal concepts. I needed eyes on my property, and I needed them installed immediately without raising any suspicion. That very weekend, under the heavy cover of darkness, I drove the 2 hours up the winding coastal highway to Seacrest Bay. I intentionally parked my car a mile away and hiked in, ensuring I did not turn on a single interior light inside the house. Instead, I spent 6 grueling hours meticulously installing a state-of-the-art, military-grade surveillance system I had overnighted from a specialty security firm for nearly $3,000. These were not your average, bulky porch cameras. They were microlenses, seamlessly integrated into motion sensor floodlights, hidden securely beneath the wooden eaves, and tucked deeply away in the dense foliage of the hydrangeas lining the crushed gravel driveway. They offered high-definition video, thermal imaging, and incredibly sensitive directional audio recording. I synced the entire covert network to an encrypted cloud server on my mobile phone and drove back to the city before the sun even crested the horizon. The invisible trap was perfectly set, but I did not have to wait very long for the rats to take the bait. Exactly 3 days later, right in the middle of a massive quarterly budget review at Etheria Dynamics, my smartwatch vibrated violently with a high-priority perimeter breach alert. I quietly excused myself to the restroom, locked myself inside a quiet stall, and pulled up the live security feed on my phone screen. My breath caught painfully in my throat. Strutting up my driveway, looking as though they owned the entire world, were Leo and Chloe. Trailing closely behind them were 3 older gentlemen dressed in exceptionally sharp, expensive business attire. I tapped the screen with a trembling finger to activate the audio feed, and the crystal-clear sound of my brother's arrogant voice filled my earpiece. "And this, gentleman, is the physical crown jewel of our enterprise," Leo announced confidently, gesturing grandly toward my custom mahogany front door. "As you can see, the luxury renovations are completely finished to our exact specifications. We secured this property outright. It serves as the rock-solid, hard collateral backing your initial investments in Aura Wellness." Chloe stepped forward, flashing a brilliant, highly rehearsed smile at the men. "Exactly," she purred smoothly. "We believe that total transparency is key for our angel investors. We wanted you to see the tangible physical asset that guarantees your capital. The deed is completely unencumbered, meaning your equity is fully protected from day one." I leaned heavily against the cool tile wall of the restroom, genuinely feeling like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. Collateral? Unencumbered deed? They were using my home, my private sanctuary, to illegally leverage private funding. I rushed back to my desk, ignoring the confused looks from my colleagues, and opened a secure private browsing window. I typed the exact name of their fake startup into the search engine, frantically scouring the internet for any digital footprint they might have left behind. It took less than 5 minutes to uncover the horror. They had constructed an incredibly slick, professionally developed investor portal and crowdfunding website. My stomach violently churned as I scrolled through the landing page. There were dozens of high-resolution drone photographs of my house, my private beach access, and my custom-built outdoor patio. The copywriting boldly and illegally proclaimed that Seacrest Bay was the fully acquired, legal headquarters of their wellness empire. But the absolute most terrifying part was the interactive investment tracker embedded near the bottom of the screen. A bright green progress bar proudly displayed that they had already raised over $350,000 from private backers, with a target goal of $1 million. They were actively selling fraudulent shares of a shell company, backed by a $500,000 asset they did not even own. The horrifying gravity of the situation hit me like a freight train. This was no longer just an annoying family dispute about an entitled wedding gift. This was a massive, highly coordinated financial fraud. Leo and Chloe were running a textbook Ponzi scheme right on my front lawn. If the federal authorities or the Securities and Exchange Commission caught wind of this, and my name or my property was somehow tied to their fraudulent filings, I could lose absolutely everything. The government could freeze my accounts and seize the house as part of a criminal investigation. Even worse, I could be falsely implicated as a silent co-conspirator in their felony. They were not just trying to steal my real estate anymore. They were actively, recklessly gambling with my freedom and my entire future. My employer, Etheria Dynamics, presented me with an unexpected opportunity that doubled as the perfect catalyst for my counteroffensive. The executive board needed a senior project manager on the ground in Geneva, Switzerland, to personally oversee a highly sensitive, critical software deployment. It was a mandatory assignment lasting exactly 3 weeks. The timing was almost too perfect. My course of action was perfectly clear. I had to let them dig their own graves. Just before leaving for the airport, I purposefully unblocked my mother's number for barely long enough to shoot off a nonchalant, ostensibly harmless text. I vented about being forced out of the States for 3 weeks, making a point to stress that I'd be virtually impossible to contact thanks to a punishing schedule of consecutive corporate seminars and a brutal time difference. I painted a picture of myself entirely consumed by corporate obligations, isolated on another continent. The bait was officially in the water, and I knew my family's insatiable greed would not allow them to ignore it. As I boarded my transatlantic flight, I had no idea of the sheer depths of criminality my own flesh and blood were willing to sink into. Based on the mountain of legal documentation I would soon acquire through discovery, the sequence of their betrayal was chillingly systematic and undeniably premeditated. Leo knew he could not simply cross my name out on a property deed with a permanent marker. He needed a skeleton key to my entire life. He found his solution in a dilapidated strip mall on the very edge of town, enlisting the services of a disgraced, deeply unethical public notary who was more than willing to look the other way for a few $1,000s in under-the-table cash. Together in that dingy back office, they drafted a comprehensive, durable power of attorney. This meticulously forged document falsely claimed I had granted my younger brother absolute, unrestricted legal authority over my real estate assets, my bank accounts, and my binding financial decisions. However, a forged signature and a dirty notary stamp were not quite enough to satisfy the rigorous standards of the county clerks. To make the document legally binding, they needed 2 independent, verifying witnesses to swear under penalty of perjury that they had physically watched me sign the document of my own free will. This is exactly where my parents crossed the definitive line from toxic, enabling parents to active, willing felons. Marcus and Elena sat in the familiar comfort of our childhood living room, surrounded by framed family photographs, and willingly signed their names on the witness lines of a fraudulent document. I can easily imagine my father justifying the blatant perjury, patting my mother's trembling hand, and telling her that they were doing the right, noble thing for the family legacy. They possessed a twisted, delusional logic. They probably reasoned that I would be incredibly angry at first, but once Aura Wellness became a massive, multi-million-dollar success, I would magically understand their vision. They convinced themselves I would actually thank them later for forcing me to be a part of it. With the stroke of a ballpoint pen, they completely sold out my financial soul. Armed with his fraudulent legal weaponry, Leo did not waste a single second. Exactly 2 days into my European business trip, While I was sitting in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom across the Atlantic Ocean, my brother confidently marched into the county land registry office. He stood at the polished wooden counter, wearing one of his expensive, custom-tailored suits, bought with stolen investor money, and slid the forged power of attorney across the glass to the unsuspecting clerk. With absolute arrogance, he formally filed the paperwork to execute a quitclaim deed. He was officially requesting the total transfer of ownership of the Seacrest Bay property from my name directly into the corporate holdings of his newly minted limited liability company. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed I was an ocean away, completely oblivious, and too preoccupied to monitor a house I supposedly did not even need. But Leo vastly underestimated my paranoia, my meticulous nature, and my exhaustive preparation. Weeks before I ever stepped foot on that airplane, immediately following the horrifying discovery of their fraudulent investor website, I had quietly enrolled in a premium, government-linked title and property monitoring service. It was a digital, high-tech tripwire designed specifically to catch real estate fraud in real time. It was late evening in Geneva. I was sitting by the large, floor-to-ceiling window of my hotel room, watching the cold rain fall over the dark lake, when my personal cell phone erupted. It was not a standard text message chime or a polite email notification. It was a harsh, blaring, red alert siren that I had specifically assigned to the monitoring application. I picked up the device, my heart slamming violently against my ribs. The high-priority notification banner glowed intensely against the dark screen. It stated that a title transfer request had just been initiated for the property located at Seacrest Bay. Attached to the alert was a secure link containing a scanned digital copy of the submitted paperwork. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing the crude, horrific forgery of my signature, followed immediately by the very real, very familiar signatures of my own mother and father acting as sworn witnesses. A sickening wave of betrayal washed over me, a physical nausea that forced me to sit down on the edge of the bed. But that grief lasted for only a fleeting moment. It was instantly replaced by an absolute, freezing, calculating rage. They had actually done it. They had committed multiple state and federal felonies just to steal the one thing I had built for myself. The line had not just been crossed, it had been permanently obliterated. The time for being the compliant, forgiving daughter was officially over. The natural instinct for anyone in my position would have been to pick up the phone, call my parents, and scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to hurl accusations across the ocean, to demand answers, to threaten them with everything I had. But blind rage is a careless weapon, and I was dealing with professional manipulators. If I tipped my hand now, they would panic, destroy the digital evidence, and twist the narrative to make me look crazy again. Instead, I swallowed the fire burning in my throat and chose absolute, deadly silence. First thing the next morning in Geneva, I bypassed standard legal counsel and directly contacted one of the most ruthless corporate fraud and real estate attorneys in the United States. His retainer was astronomically high, costing me tens of thousands of dollars, but I considered it the best investment I had ever made. Over a highly encrypted video call, I showed him the forged power of attorney, the security footage of the investor tours, and the fraudulent crowdfunding website. He did not gasp or offer empty sympathies. He simply smiled a cold, predatory smile and said, "Josephine, we are going to utterly destroy them." The immediate priority was freezing the property transfer without tipping off my brother. My attorney worked his extensive network and quietly contacted the county land registry office. Under the guise of a routine, randomized compliance audit, he instructed the clerks to place an invisible, indefinite administrative hold on Leo's quitclaim deed. To my brother, checking the online portal from his laptop, the status simply read, "Processing." A totally normal delay for local government bureaucracy. We gave him the comforting illusion that everything was proceeding exactly according to his master plan. He remained blissfully unaware that he was standing on a trapdoor, and I was holding the lever. I finished my software deployment in Switzerland a full week ahead of schedule. However, I maintained the facade of being stranded in Europe, scheduling automated text messages to send to my mother at odd hours, complaining about jet lag and endless meetings. In reality, I was already back in the United States, operating out of a short-term rental apartment across town. With my attorney handling the real estate aspect, I needed to lock down the financial fraud. I hired a top-tier private investigator to follow the money. Within 10 days, the investigator handed me a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. It detailed exactly how Leo and Chloe were operating their Ponzi scheme. They were not investing a single dime of the crowd-funded capital into actual wellness infrastructure. Instead, they were funneling the hundreds of thousands of dollars from those elderly gentlemen into a web of personal accounts to fund their extravagant lifestyle and their upcoming luxury wedding. The investigator even pulled bank records showing massive deposits clearly labeled as Aura Wellness Seed Capital, being immediately drained to pay for custom floral arrangements, imported champagne, and a high-end wedding planner. With the financial picture perfectly painted, my attorney and I took the entire mountain of evidence directly to the local district attorney. We handed over the high-definition security footage, the bank routing numbers, the investigator's comprehensive report, and the indisputable proof of the forged signatures. The prosecutors were practically salivating. This was not a minor family dispute. It was a multi-count federal wire fraud, identity theft, and perjury case tied up with a neat little bow. Warrants were quietly drafted, subpoenas were signed, and a massive criminal net was cast over my entire family. The timing could not have been more poetic. Leo and Chloe's lavish wedding was exactly 3 days away. Drunk on their perceived success and entirely funded by stolen investor cash, they decided to host a massive, dual-purpose event. They sent out elegant, gold-foiled digital invitations for an exclusive pre-wedding celebration and investor launch party. And the venue they chose for this grand spectacle? The immaculate front lawn of my house at Seacrest Bay. They had hired caterers to set up white linen tables under the stars, completely convinced that the property was legally theirs and that the annoying corporate sister was safely tucked away in Switzerland. I sat in my rental car, parked just down the winding coastal road, staring at the glowing party lights strung across my deck. The crisp evening air drifted through my slightly opened window, carrying the distant sound of clinking glasses and a live jazz band playing on my porch. My brother was currently playing the role of the triumphant executive, celebrating his wedding and his stolen wealth. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusted my blazer, and smiled. I had decided to attend the celebration after all. But as I watched a line of unmarked dark sedans pull up silently behind my vehicle, I knew I certainly was not arriving alone. The air at Seacrest Bay was thick with the scent of expensive catered seafood and the arrogant perfume of unearned success. I stepped out of my rental vehicle, smoothing the crisp lines of my tailored blazer, and walked deliberately up the crushed gravel driveway. The sight before me was nauseatingly lavish. Huge flowing white canvas tents had been erected across my front lawn. A 5-piece jazz ensemble was playing softly in the corner of my wraparound deck. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated through the crowd of wealthy, well-dressed elderly investors, offering crystal flutes of imported vintage champagne. All of this, every single opulent detail of this pre-wedding investor gala, was being funded by the hard-earned money my brother had stolen through lies and deceit. Standing directly in front of the massive, custom-built oak doors of my home, Leo commanded the attention of the crowd. He tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. A bright, triumphant smile plastered across his face. Chloe stood beside him, draped in a designer silk evening gown that undoubtedly cost more than a standard luxury car. The crowd of investors fell silent, turning their attention to the golden couple. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners," Leo began, his voice amplified by a sleek microphone system. Tonight is not just a celebration of our upcoming marriage. It is a celebration of our shared vision. I am incredibly proud to announce that as of this week, the physical transfer of this magnificent coastal estate is officially complete. This property, our flagship sanctuary, is now fully and legally secured as the foundational asset of Aura Wellness. Your investments are completely protected by the very ground we are standing on. Applause rippled through the crowd. My parents, Marcus and Elena, were standing in the front row, beaming with misplaced pride, clapping the loudest. I had seen enough. I bypassed the security checkpoint at the edge of the lawn, flashing a hard, unyielding glare at the hired guard who tried to stop me. I marched directly down the center aisle of the crowd. The gravel crunched loudly under my heels, a sharp, rhythmic sound that slowly drew the attention of the guests. One by one, heads turned. The polite applause died down into confused murmurs. When my mother finally spotted me, her clapping hands froze in midair. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. My father dropped his jaw, his eyes darting frantically between me and Leo. I walked straight up the wooden steps of my deck, stepping right into the center of the makeshift stage. Leo stared at me, his triumphant smile melting into an expression of sheer, unadulterated panic. "Josephine," he stammered, his voice cracking violently. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be in Geneva." "My project finished early," I replied, my voice cold, steady, and projecting clearly over the microphone he was still loosely holding. I turned my back to him and faced the sea of confused investors. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Josephine Rivera. I am the sole, legal, and rightful owner of the property you are currently standing on. And unfortunately for all of you, you are the victims of a massive, highly orchestrated financial fraud." A collective gasp echoed across the lawn. Chloe lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone from the stand, screaming that I was an insane, jealous relative trying to ruin their perfect day. But I was infinitely more prepared than she was. I pulled a thick, heavy manila envelope from under my arm. It was tightly bound and stamped heavily with the official red seal of the county district court. At the exact same time, I aimed a small remote at the massive digital projector screen they had set up behind the podium to display their fake corporate logos. I pressed the button, overriding their system. The screen flashed brightly, illuminating the dark lawn with an undeniable truth. Side by side, I projected two documents. On the left was the crude, fraudulent power of attorney, complete with my forged signature and the perjured witness signatures of my own parents. On the right, I displayed the official county-verified deed to Seacrest Bay, firmly establishing me as the sole unencumbered owner, alongside a live administrative notice showing that Leo's quitclaim transfer had been permanently frozen and flagged for federal investigation. "The man standing before you does not own this house," I declared, my voice echoing like thunder into the night air. "He never has. He forged a legal document while I was out of the country to trick you into funding his wedding and his lavish lifestyle. Your money did not go into a wellness retreat. It went into the champagne you are currently drinking, the jazz band you are listening to, and the silk dress his fiancée is wearing." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Then, the crowd erupted. The refined, polite investors transformed instantly into a furious mob. An older gentleman in a dark suit threw his champagne glass onto the grass, storming toward the stage and demanding his $50,000 back immediately. Others joined in, shouting over one another, completely surrounding Leo and Chloe. My brother was backing away, his hands raised defensively, sputtering, pathetic, incoherent excuses about administrative errors and simple misunderstandings. Chloe was crying hysterically, her carefully crafted facade shattering into a million pieces. But the ultimate reckoning had not even fully arrived. Right as the angry mob began closing in on my brother, the piercing, unmistakable sound of heavy sirens tore through the coastal night. Red and blue emergency lights violently illuminated the white canvas tents as 4 unmarked vans and 3 local police cruisers aggressively breached the driveway. Dozens of federal agents and officers from the white-collar crime divisions swarmed the property. They bypassed the screaming investors and marched straight onto the deck. "Leo Rivera and Chloe Vance," the lead detective barked over the chaos, flashing a gold badge. "You are both under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal forgery." The harsh metallic click of handcuffs snapping around my brother's wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. They patted him down, read him his Miranda rights, and forcefully marched him and his sobbing fiancée off my property and into the back of a waiting squad car. As the police began taking formal statements from the outraged investors, I felt a heavy hand grab my arm. I turned around to see my parents. They were completely broken. My mother was weeping uncontrollably, her mascara running down her face in thick, dark streaks. My father, the man who had patronized me and defended his golden boy for decades, looked frail and utterly terrified. "Josephine, please," my mother wailed, dropping entirely to her knees on the wooden deck. "You have to tell them it was a mistake. You have to drop the charges. They are going to send your brother to a federal penitentiary. You cannot do this to your own family." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a profound, echoing emptiness where my familial love used to be. "I am not doing anything to him," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Leo did this to himself, and you helped him. You committed perjury. You willingly signed a forged document to steal my home. You are lucky I convinced the district attorney not to place you in handcuffs tonight as active co-conspirators." "We are your parents," my father screamed, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. "We did it for the family." "You stopped being my family the moment you tried to destroy my life," I replied sharply. I stepped back, firmly pulling my arm out of his grasp. "Get off my property. Now, before I have you arrested for trespassing." They stumbled away into the dark, completely shattered by the reality of their own actions. The aftermath of that night was an absolute bloodbath of consequences. The wedding obviously was completely canceled, leaving them with tens of thousands of dollars in non-refundable vendor debts. Leo and Chloe were denied bail, entirely recognized as major flight risks. They are currently sitting in a county jail cell, awaiting a federal trial that will almost certainly result in a long, devastating prison sentence. As for my parents, the district attorney offered them a brutal plea deal. To avoid facing formal felony charges for perjury and falsifying official documents, Marcus and Elena were forced to immediately liquidate all of their assets. They had to sell their comfortable retirement home, empty their pension funds, and use every single penny to partially reimburse the furious investors. They lost everything: their golden child, their savings, their home, and their daughter. They are currently renting a tiny, cramped apartment on the bad side of town, living off a meager Social Security check, completely isolated and disgraced. As for me, I am exactly where I belong. It is a quiet Sunday morning. I am sitting on the custom mahogany balcony of my house at Seacrest Bay, wrapped in a warm blanket. I take a slow, deep sip of freshly brewed coffee, letting the rich aroma fill my lungs. I close my eyes and listen to the rhythmic, soothing sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline. There are no frantic phone calls, no manipulative text messages, no heavy burdens of forced obligation. The toxic tumor that I once called my family has been permanently and surgically removed. For the first time in my entire life, I am completely alone, and I have never felt more absolutely, perfectly at peace. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, We'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.